So without further ado, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome and to introduce our Chancellor candidate, Dr. Christopher Villa. Good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you, Anita, and I want to thank all of you this afternoon for participation in this open forum. I know it's very important to UNM-Taos, and I really appreciate the time and effort you're putting in this afternoon to hear some comments from me and to answer some of your questions. I also want to thank the IT staff for working hard to resolve this issue, and I want to thank you for your patience in the beginning of this open forum. It started maybe a little late, but I know you're hanging in there, and I appreciate you spending time with me this afternoon. So let me do a quick introduction. My name is Christopher Villa. A lot of people call me Chris. I'm very comfortable being called by my first name. I do like to be referred to as Dr. Villa, though, in many situations where there are students, because I feel that as a person of Hispanic background, I think it's important to be a role model for students of color in particular, and especially our Hispanic students. So let me share a few things about my background. My family is originally from northern Mexico. We're from the state of Sonora. My family immigrated to the United States about 100 years ago, and in that immigration settled in the Southern California area. My father came in as an undocumented person, but he achieved his documentation in this country by virtue of serving in World War II. So I'm very proud of his service to the country, and I'm very proud of my culture coming from a Hispanic background, but also proud to be associated with the American culture as well. I come from an environment where I grew up. Many of the folks that I grew up with didn't complete high school. I grew up in East Los Angeles in a barrio environment. And unfortunately, from that experience, I learned that there's just so much talent that can be taken advantage of that goes to the wayside, because young people in particular, in many instances back then and even now, are having issues with respect to completing high school and eventually enrolling at a college. So I have a strong passion for helping people who are disadvantaged in many ways by our systems that don't enable them to take full advantage of the opportunities that we offer in this country. I'm interested in this position because I am familiar with Taos. I've spent time here over the last several years visiting the area. I admit I view Taos from a tourist perspective, and this position is important in that I view it not from a tourist perspective, but as someone who's going to live and actively participate in the college community and in the community surrounding the college or the branch campus. I'm very proud of the fact that I have a strong background in equity, and this is part of the reason why I'm interested in this position. 52% of the enrollment here is Hispanic, 9% Native American, and this position provides a great opportunity for me as your branch chancellor, campus chancellor, to do something, to do great things, to work with all of you to improve outcomes for our students, improve their opportunities. In terms of my background, I have a significant amount of experience in higher education, over 30 years of experience in higher ed, actually over 35. Much of that experience was in the student services area. I've been a VP for student services for about 12 years, and I just came from Portland Community College, Rock Creek, where I've been campus president for 2 years. Unfortunately, in my case, our college at Portland Community College decided to do a reorganization similar to the reorganization that happened at New Mexico State with their branch campuses. So our president positions were eliminated. So I didn't get the chance to fulfill my desire to make a large, significant impact over a number of years at PCC Rock Creek. I was able to spend 2 years there, got great experience as a campus president, and I hope to use that experience and fulfill my desire to make a large imprint working with all of you in improving outcomes for our students here at UNM-Taos. In terms of other experiences, I didn't start as an administrator in my career. I started as a classified staff for about 9 years. So I have experience working on the front lines, working with students. I have experience working as a dean, as a vice president, and as a president. So I can see the operations of a college from different perspectives from my own personal experience. As I mentioned earlier, keenly interested in equity and keenly interested in doing whatever I can to help our Hispanic and Native American groups in the community to achieve improved outcomes. Outcomes like increased persistence, increased retention, and ultimately completion of degrees, certificates, and other short-term goals. I also have a desire to let you know, in terms of my experience, to share with you that all these experiences I've had in my career at different levels, I think prepare me well for this position. I've talked to my wife, I talked to my family about relocation to this area, and I can commit to you that should I be selected for this position, I will live in the community and be very actively involved externally and internally. I feel that my experience at PCC Rock Creek was not fulfilled as a campus president because of the reorganization. And because of that, I feel like I'm in a position where I know I can make a major contribution to a smaller community such as Taos. And I'm confident that I can do that as your campus chancellor. So given those experiences, I wanted to share a few things about me personally and professionally. And I'd rather spend more time answering your questions and talking about myself. So I'm going to stop at this point. And please feel free to start the questions, and I'll do my best to answer them as best as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Villa, for that great introduction and opening statement. So the questions, we have some great questions coming in. The first one, how do you foster collaboration and communication between staff, faculty, and students?
The key question in your question is how I do that. So let me share with you a few things about my personality and what I do when I work in an environment of collaboration. So first of all, I've learned through my own personal life that it's important to be a good listener and also a collaborator. Let me explain. So in my relationships with people in my personal life, and in particular my partner, my wife, I think it's critical that I practice this behavior personally, this collaborative behavior. Otherwise, I'm going to have difficulty being a successful leader here at this particular campus. So by nature, I have a strong desire to be collaborative in anything I do. I don't like making decisions independent from consultation. It's just part of my nature as a person. And I think that works in my personal relationships and my professional relationships. I believe in constituent-based feedback. And I believe in feedback that I get from individuals, from all of you, in helping us make decisions. What I've learned through my whole experiences as a leader and a manager in higher education is that the best decisions are made collaboratively. Let me explain. So coming from the state of California and from Oregon, I'm very used to being in an environment where I consult extensively with our cabinet, with our leadership and management team before making a decision. And I'm used to consulting with faculty groups like the faculty council, the staff council. I'm very used to working with union groups in making decisions. So count on me to be someone that's going to participate in processes where I'm going to seek feedback from all of you as groups, and then also individually to help us make the best decisions for our students. So that's been my style. It's something I've done for many years. I can tell you a story of one time when I messed up, basically. It's when I started working at a community college in California, and I thought that I had this great idea to assign a group of students to each of our counselors to mentor them. And it didn't work because the counselors initially were nice and wanted to support me. But contractually, based on the contract because we're in a union environment in California, they didn't have to do this. And I just thought from that experience, oh, wait, don't come up with these great ideas and try to impose them on people. I mean, step back, take the time to listen to people, and then make decisions based on feedback from our leadership team, our managers, our faculty and staff. And in the context of strategic planning in particular, make sure you clarify how decisions are made. And I want to make sure that decisions are made after extensive consultation with all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Villa. The next question comes from a staff member that oversees our Taos Education and Career Center, Adult Basic Education, and works a lot with workforce training. Mm-hmm. The question is, what is your experience with integrated education and training, IET, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, WIOA? And what do you see as the role of the community college when it comes to preparing students for the workforce who may not yet be college and career ready?
Okay. Let me start off by sharing with you that I have experience having taught ESL as a part-time instructor for a school district in Southern California. So I understand that training folks who are in need of this type of education is something I'm familiar with. Having been a college or campus president at PCC Rock Creek, this was a critical issue for all of us. And as you know, community colleges throughout this country have been putting a greater emphasis on certificate programs, on CTE, and on workforce training, and so forth. So the key here is to work with our workforce training arm of the campus, me as your chancellor, to listen to what the local opportunities are to expand our workforce training opportunities. At Rock Creek, we saw opportunities in sustaining a grant that supported folks who were ESL curriculum or who were primarily Spanish speakers. The program is called HEP. It's a national grant, and we were able to sustain that and did some great things with regard to helping folks who are in transition, who needed to learn more English and take full advantage of entrepreneurial opportunities in the local region up there in Oregon. I'm also a strong believer in advocating for more funding for workforce employment opportunities. And I've been in that position where I've advocated strongly for these opportunities through different mechanisms, whether it's to write a letter of support for a federal grant or a local grant, but it's more than writing a letter. It's actually participating and learning more from the folks who oversee workforce training on your campus. So my experience has been to be a strong advocate, especially for ESL programming, to be a strong advocate and working with our local industries to enable our folks to take full advantage of workforce training opportunities. And besides the ESL population that I work with in Oregon, we work with local businesses and provided opportunities for our students to get job training through apprenticeship opportunities and such. So I'm used to being in that environment, but as your chancellor, I'm going to need time to understand what the dynamics are, what the priorities are, what the opportunities are, and count on me as your chancellor to advocate to expand workforce training opportunities and to do everything possible to get as many of our folks engaged in workforce training. Workforce training leads to other things. In many instances, folks who participate in workforce training have family members, brothers, sisters, children who get exposed to the college by virtue of their participation in our workforce training programs. So I see workforce training as an opportunity not just to benefit individuals, but to benefit families as well, especially low-income, first-generation college student families. So those are some of the things I was associated with in Oregon. And again, count on me to be a strong advocate to expand on our workforce training opportunities here in Taos.
Thank you. Speaking of grants, as you know, a large portion of our budget is funded through state and federal grants. This question is regarding the many contracts and grants that UNM-Taos has to serve community members, pre-college students, and those from multi-county catchments. Many of these people may never become UNM-Taos students. What are your thoughts about the role of a community college in building the local communities throughout northern New Mexico?
Okay. Well, I have a lot of experience in grant writing. As I accumulated all the information I could with regard to my grant writing experience, I can say confidently that it generated about $7 million in grant writing, the funds in which I did grant writing, or was a team that wrote for the grants. It is true that many of these grants that we receive from the federal government or the state, especially the federal government, may not have a direct benefit, sole benefit for the college, or for this case, our campus. I'm perfectly fine with that. One of the grants in which I was able to fund, or I was successful in getting funding, was in in the state of California, in the Central Coast area. This was an educational talent search program grant that is still in place now. It's been in place now for 30 years. We originated the grant. I wrote this proposal, and it benefits low-income migrant workers ranging from King City, a small town in the Central Coast area of California, to communities like Soledad, Gonzales, Chulad, and others like that. The students who participate in educational talent search are not necessarily going to end up enrolling at the university or at the college, right? But this is a grant that's going to benefit the community as a whole. So I'm perfectly comfortable in having grants that support our community with the possibility that the students who are benefiting from those grants in the local region may not end up enrolling at the college. I have a strong affinity for grants, not just at the federal level, but at the state level and local grants. I'm always looking for ways to expand our funding base. I'd be very curious to learn more about how the grant writing process works within the UNM system. But I will be a strong supporter of expanding our external grant funding sources, not just for programs like Upward Bound, which you have here for our veterans, but also STEM Upward Bound. I'm interested in expanding these grants, but I know that we also have to look at some of our limitations with regard to our staffing and our ability to get these grants submitted. And certainly as your chancellor, I'll be advocating to seek funding at the local level or state level to support whatever priorities we identify as a campus. And given my experience in grant writing, count on me to be someone that will advocate strongly to expand our portfolio with regard to funding from external sources.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This next comment and question comes from a staff member. Welcome. First, she says, Dr. Villa,
Thank you.
I have returned home to Taos after 28 years as a faculty member and administrator with the California Community College system. During my tenure there, I saw some major differences in the challenges and opportunities for minority students in California versus New Mexico. In your perspective, what contrast do you see in the experiences of Hispanic and Indigenous students from California versus New Mexico? And I'm going to add another piece to that. Is there any differences in the way that you would approach serving students in California versus New Mexico?
There are differences. There are a lot of differences between California and New Mexico. The first thing is California has a lot more funding. And I'm glad that you asked the question about the differences. As you probably know, in California, there's a whole funding stream to support what are considered to be restricted programs or categorical programs. For instance, your disabled students population benefits from a DSPS, Disabled Student Programs and Services funding stream, which is significant. There are funding streams for students who are low income through a program called EOPS. Those funding streams are in place and have been in place for many years in California, benefiting, in many instances, students of color. Now California is moving towards funding equity-oriented programs, identifying African-American students and Latino students in particular with respect to a funding stream that will be ongoing year to year to support these equity-oriented programs, which are race or ethnic-oriented. So there's a major contrast between California and New Mexico in that we don't have that funding stream in place here. So we have to be more creative in figuring out what we need to prioritize and what we need to fund and how we can get that funding to support those priorities. And I'm going to assume that those priorities will include a high priority on any equity-oriented programming or equity-oriented activity. That being said, there's also a distinction in the cultures. The term Hispanic is not really used a whole lot in California anymore. In fact, terminology has shifted. Many students of color, and especially students who are considered Hispanic here, are considered Latino, Mexican-American, Chicano, and now the term that's being used commonly is Latinx. And the reason why the Latinx term is being used is because of identity issues, gender identity issues, that are being addressed head on by folks in the state of California overall. So for folks who don't want to be identified with a particular identity, they're often put in a category in which they're accepted and valued with respect to their preference. So that's why the X term pops up. My read here in New Mexico, having visited the state a number of times, is that there's a very strong Hispanic culture here, tied into ancestral lands that were occupied for many years by folks who were Spanish. And there's also a great culture here with our Native American folks. You have Pueblos here. You have Pueblos that have strong identification with this culture. In California, there are populations, there are tribal communities, but they're smaller. And frankly, they get kind of drowned out in many instances when it comes to equity because of the strong or the large population of Hispanics in California. So I'm aware of these dynamics. And I'll admit, I'm from California, and I'm not going to assume that the cultures are the same. They're distinct. And part of my learning curve as your chancellor will be to ask a lot of questions and to do everything possible to be respectful of the cultures here in New Mexico, and to validate and work hard to make sure that we're doing everything possible to help people who identify strongly with being whatever it is they want to be identified with. But those are some of the distinctions. I acknowledge them, but I can tell you, it won't be a problem for me to make that shift. In fact, I welcome coming here and making the shift in terms of how we identify people of Hispanic and Native American cultures and what we can do to help them. But the reality is we're severely underfunded in New Mexico compared to California. I'm fully aware of that. So I've got some thinking to do, but I'm going to advocate strongly for these and other communities which are considered marginalized and have felt the effects of systemic racism or discrimination.
Thank you, Dr. Villa, for your response. The next question, as the UNM-Taos Chancellor, what is your vision for institutional research? What are your thoughts regarding the role of data and institutional research in advancing equity outcomes at institutions of higher education?
Institutional research is critical in the development and implementation of a strategic plan. I know that the strategic plan for this branch campus is going to be in need of being updated. You have a plan that's from 2014 to 2019, and I can share with you that I will consult extensively with all of you in updating that plan. But that plan cannot really have a significant role in the future of this campus unless we have data, and not just quantitative data, but qualitative data to measure our outcomes. So from my experience, institutional research is the arm that will provide that data for us. And I remember from my experience in California, what was happening in California community colleges about 10 years ago was that many of the colleges and community colleges in California were experiencing sanction from the Accreditation Commission. And the reason for that is because many colleges didn't provide sufficient data to justify those things that they were proclaiming to do in their self-studies, right? Their self-evaluations. So like many community colleges, we beefed up our staffing of institutional research folks. And that worked. Most community colleges now are not experiencing sanction. Here, from what I can tell, we have a higher learning commission, and I guess you call it the HLC, isn't necessarily doing the same thing that California was doing 10 years ago. So I don't think there necessarily is a lot of external pressure to provide more. Well, I think there is from the HLC, but I think we need to do this, not just because it's something that we're pressured to do by an accreditation commission, but how can we make effective decisions without good data? So getting back to a question that Anita asked earlier about survey or data, I'm a big fan of gathering data on our students and slicing and dicing the data in many different ways, not just from an ethnic, gender, and other perspective, but to just see what's going on with respect to our students. And not just ethnic groups. I'm very concerned about our LGBTQIA students. I found at one of our community colleges in California, they've recently done a survey on our LGBTQ population. And we found that in many instances, they still feel marginalized, not accepted by the folks who work at that particular college. Fortunately, at Portland Community College Rock Creek, we did collect data on our student populations. And fortunately, we found that many of our undocumented students enrolled at PCC Rock Creek and many of our LGBTQ students did feel welcome. But that's because we did a lot of work to help them feel welcome. So I'm a strong proponent of having institutional research be a major component in our strategic planning. I do believe in having benchmarks, but reasonable benchmarks. I've seen benchmarks in strategic plans where the aspirational goals are almost impossible to achieve. Perhaps we'll go in that direction if that's what we all want to do, but I'm more inclined to support benchmarks that are can be realistically achieved within a reasonable time frame, typically within 2 to 4 or 3 to 5 years. So for instance, if the successful course completion rate in math is X%, I'd like to see an improvement in that by a certain percentage, but one that's reasonable, that's achievable. And then with qualitative data, I think it's critical to survey our students on a qualitative level to see what they really think about our faculty and staff and us as administrators and me as chancellor. So I am keenly interested in reviewing what resources we're dedicating to institutional research. I am very supportive of that. And then he says something else related to research. And I'm not sure if the question got at this, but I'm interested in research in general. And having worked at University of Utah for 6 years, and I worked in the graduate school as an assistant dean, I had the responsibility to recruit more minority students to graduate programs at the U. And I was able to build up a summer research opportunity program so that we had about 50 students a year come to this program, many from New Mexico. That's why I know New Mexico well, because I used to travel to New Mexico and recruit students to come to my summer program. And this is an 8-week summer research opportunity program. And many of the students we brought in were for community colleges because the grant had that component built in, and many were Native American students. So from a research perspective, answering the question from a different angle, as a chancellor, I'm going to be keenly interested in working with UNM Albuquerque or main campus and doing everything we can to identify resources to get more of our students to participate in research opportunities. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that if we get more students participating in research, they're more likely to consider teaching at the community college level or at the university level if they participate in these programs. And I know, having run a program like that for 6 years in Utah, I have probably about 10 to 20 students in my network who've gone on and completed doctorates or master's degrees, and they're teaching now at different colleges and universities. So if we talk about improving the faculty pipeline for students, I'm keenly interested in working with UNM main campus with Albuquerque to see what we can do to increase the number of our students who participate in research opportunities.
Thank you, Dr. Villa, for that thorough response. So thorough, in fact, that you already answered another question about strategic planning. So if we have time, we'll cycle back to that specific question about strategic planning, but in the interest of time, we'll move on to another question, which comes from our staff council. And that they would like to know, what is something that UNM-Taos is currently doing that impresses you?
I'll just start out with the facility. It's beautiful and it's being kept up nicely. I mean, it makes an impression when you have a facility that's kept and it looks beautiful. So I want to compliment our staff council members who are in the area of custodial and other work. I'm also proud of the fact that you've done a lot of work during this stressful time during the pandemic. I think it's not easy to work under these conditions where we're all worried about getting COVID or having loved ones getting COVID And we're all worried for our families and our children, and then we have to deal with our own safety with respect to this horrible pandemic. So I think the council, I would assume, has done a really good job at holding it together in terms of providing support for our classified staff or staff. So even though I don't know for sure, but I have the sense that you've worked hard to maintain support for each other. And you've been patient in that you haven't had a permanent chancellor now for, it seems like about 5-6 months. And I know you're waiting to get someone in this position as soon as possible to support the work that you're doing. I appreciate the fact that you're doing a lot of work online, and you really didn't have the opportunity to do a lot of this work before. And I appreciate the fact the faculty as well are doing a lot of work online. We were thrust under this emergency situation, and I know this from my experience at PCC Rock Creek, where we had to shift all of our services and our instruction from primarily in person to online, right? So it appears to me that you've done a whole lot with respect as a staff council and as a staff to sustain a high level of quality service under these circumstances. So I'm very appreciative of that you're doing that. But I know many of you are anxiously awaiting to come back to campus and to go back to what we had before. But it's going to be interesting. We don't know exactly what it's going to be like. I think there's going to be some difference with respect to what we had before in terms of in-person services to our students and what we're going to have post-pandemic. But whatever we do, count on me not to make independent decisions without seeking your feedback as a staff council. I am used to working with staff councils, with faculty senates in making decisions. So I want to assure you that in terms of the post-pandemic environment, we're going to consult with you extensively before making that decision. So I just want to compliment you on holding it together and doing everything possible to make this the special place it is. Again, I want to compliment the facilities and the staff who have done a great job at making this campus look really neat.
Thank you, Dr. Villa. We appreciate your recognition and observation on our campus, and the appreciation to our staff and faculty that work hard to keep our campus up and to serve our students. Yeah. And your what appears to be, what I observe to be, a real commitment to incorporate the feedback and participation of staff and faculty.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
Yes.
Speaking of faculty, the next question comes from one of our STEM faculty members. We have a high number of adjunct faculty here at UNM-Taos. And the question is, what ideas do you have to support adjunct faculty?
Let me speak from the perspective of being an adjunct faculty myself and my daughter being an adjunct faculty. I was and still an adjunct faculty at California State University, Northridge. I taught graduate level courses in educational leadership and policy. So I got a perspective of what it's like to be part-time faculty. And first of all, there's no office space dedicated to individual part-time faculty. We had a shared office space, but nevertheless, the university did what it could to provide support for me in teaching these courses part-time. My daughter also is part-time faculty at Santa Monica College in Southern California. So I know that this is a really significant issue for all of us at community colleges, because we know that the bulk of our faculty are not full-time, they're part-time. And we know for a fact that they're not compensated at the level that they should be for all the hard work that they do. I totally understand that, I get it. And it's an issue that's ongoing that we're trying to resolve, not only here in New Mexico, but regionally and I assume nationally. So I believe it's really important for me to work through your appropriate channels, whether it's a faculty senate or academic senate, or if you have representation through unionization, or if you have a group that represents the part-time faculty, I want to hear from you. I want to hear what specific concerns you have that go beyond compensation. Many of our part-time faculty, as you know, are dealing with issues like adequate office space, adequate support to be able to teach courses, support not just in terms of hard copy and hard stuff, but technology. And one of the questions that I think I'd like to address is the role that part-time faculty play in supporting our student success efforts. Many of our students are taking courses with our part-time faculty. And yet, from my experience in California and in Oregon, much of the training that goes on with respect to focusing on the curriculum or focusing on strategies to improve success for students is directed at our full-time faculty. So I'm interested in finding ways to engage our part-time faculty more in these efforts. I've had experience where part-time faculty were compensated for their time in addition to their base salary to participate in these training opportunities. So I'm open to these ideas, but I want to assure you that I'm keenly interested in making sure that our part-time faculty are valued and supported by the chancellor and by the branch campus and by the university. And I come in with that orientation because I know what it's like to be part-time faculty. And I have a daughter who went through this experience as well.
Thank you, Dr. Villa. We've talked some already this morning about how a branch campus or a community college exists within and serves the community. So the next couple questions are related to that. The first one, while acknowledging our population's diverse literate and linguistic practices and strength, New Mexico is tied for the lowest adult literacy rates in the country. What do you feel the role of a community college is in providing adult literacy education, not just for those pursuing an HSC or higher ed, but for community members at large?
Critical. One of the things I love about community colleges is that we provide opportunities for people who are in different stages of their lives, at different levels of education, different levels of experience with respect to their socioeconomic status. Unlike universities, and I have experience working at universities, they don't serve these populations like we do. And it's one of the things I love about us, that we are, in many instances, we're open door. We're waiting for you whenever you're ready to partake in what we have to offer. So in dealing with adult literacy, this is a critical issue. So I'm going to give you a personal example, a story that I'm dealing with right now. So my wife, Diane, and me took in a foster child about 3 years ago. And she's returned to her mother, and we know the mother really well. And we're working with the mother to help her child break this cycle of having participated in the foster system and ultimately either not going to college, or if you go to college, you're not going to succeed. And I know this from the data I've collected. Of all the groups that I've been able to survey or gather data from in my experience in higher education, whether it's an ethnic group, or if it's a gender, or if it's a group like athletes, the group that has the low success rates of any group are folks who participated in the foster system for a number of reasons. This child now is 12 years old, and we're still working with her, and her mother is basically illiterate. And we don't place a value judgment on her for her situation. She's actually done a lot to improve her skills as a parent, and we praise her, and actually become like a second daughter to us. We are in a stage where I have to be patient, but I want to plug this mother into a local community college and take full advantage of what we have to offer. So what I'm trying to share with you is that in dealing with adult literacy, it's a challenge because many of our folks who are dealing with literacy issues have either personal, psychological, or socioeconomic or other factors which inhibit their ability to take full advantage of what we have to offer here at UNM-Taos. I'm fully cognizant of this. So I would be really interested in learning more in terms of what strategies we're doing to try to engage and connect more folks who are like this mother so that we can maximize their participation in these programs. I president, I've supported programming and supervised programming that tries to reach out to local employers or local community-based organizations to plug folks in to take full advantage of what we have to offer at the community college. But the reality is there's a large segment of our population who, like this mother, for whatever reasons, aren't ready to start in participating in our adult literacy efforts. So I'd like to hear from you what we're doing, and then I like to use my personal experience in dealing with this particular situation and others to maximize participation in our adult literacy efforts here at UNM-Taos.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So if you can talk to us a bit about your philosophy and approach to developing healthy teams, particularly around things that you would do for motivation and or when needed, conflict resolution, and or when it comes up, addressing dysfunction.
Okay. So let me start with healthy teams, and I'll start with classified staff. I'm going to tell you right now, and I've done this at the last 3 colleges I've worked. I'm going to, I sound like I'm making a political statement, and I'm going to deliver on a promise. This is practically a promise, but I am going to tell you that if I'm chosen as your chancellor, I want to get to know our classified staff on a more personal level. How will I do that? This is what I've done in the past, and what I'd like to do as your chancellor. I like to get staff from various departments together and have coffee with them. It sounds simple, but I like building relationships with people so that you feel connected to me as your chancellor or your president, and I learn more about you. One of the rules, though, is that I'd like to have you say, you might have complaints about your department or what's going on, and that's okay if you want to talk about that. But I just want to get to know you more. I want to build community. So I've done this in the past, and everywhere I've gone, I've gotten major kudos for doing this. So I want to assure you that I would do this. And I did the same with our faculty at PCC Rock Creek. I would host lunches where I identified full-time and I believe part-time faculty in a couple of instances, where we just had lunch and we just talked shop about what's really going on in your department. And I don't mean all the negative stuff necessarily, but just having ideas with respect to what we could do to improve your experience within the campus, the branch campus setting. So my philosophy, or what I like to do, is I like to promote having an informal environment. By that, I mean that if you come to my office, and I think I walked by it earlier today, but I didn't see the inside. It looks pretty formal, but one of the things I like to do is step out of my office and not just interact with you in your own spaces, but if you come to the office, step out of my office and greet you in the foyer. And I think that's important to demonstrate that I'm reaching out to you, waiting for you to come to me, right? I think that builds a healthy environment. I think what also builds a healthy environment is to find ways to have fun, to relieve ourselves from some of the pressures that we have in our work. So I don't know what you do from a perspective of having events or activities where you informally get together and have these fun activities. There's one in particular that's worked well for me in the last 3 campuses in which I've worked. That's to have an event during Halloween where we decorate a pumpkin and we have various departments participate. And the rule is you can't cut the pumpkin, you have to dress it up. Okay. And then the department that wins the prize gets some weird contraption that you put in your office for a year, and then it goes on every year. And people look forward to the activity. So I'm really interested in having fun activities, and I would get involved. I'm not interested in not participating. Count on me to participate in those activities. And I think in terms of conflict resolution, one of the ways to resolve conflict is to be preventative. And by that I mean is by me and expecting our managers to have a real healthy relationship with all of you as faculty and staff. And that cannot happen unless we build community and we actually interact with each other in a meaningful way. So I found that in working with different colleges, that's worked for me, that these informal relationships are big with respect to diffusing conflict. I guarantee you, there is conflict going on now at UNM-Taos. And the way I like to resolve it is if there's conflict, it depends on what the situation. if there is a policy or a regulation in place, I like to rely on rules that are in place before involving myself in trying to resolve a conflict or expecting the manager to resolve a conflict. If there's a contractual agreement, I'm used to being in a union environment, for instance, where there's a difference of opinion and interpretation of the contract. I expect that managers reporting to me or me, I get involved in resolving conflicts. But I will share this with you. I've done a lot of conflict resolution in my career, and my ultimate goal is to have an outcome in which we all agree to. And when that doesn't happen, I can let you know that I will be very respectful in any processes in which I'm going to try to resolve conflicts between any of you. And I'm going to do everything possible to have a meaningful resolve to that conflict. And I don't mean me, I mean our team. I mean our management team working with all of you. So that's the approach I would take. And those are some of the things I would do to diffuse or to build a healthy work environment for all of us.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're just about out of time for this session. We do apologize for getting a late start. For those of you that would like to visit more with Dr. Villa, you're welcome and encouraged to join us for the Greater Community Public Session that will be starting at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Registration is required for that. So you check your emails to get into that link and join us at 3 p.m. I do also remind you to please submit the feedback surveys. I entered the link there in the chat. It's important for the provost to get our campus community feedback on each of the candidates that we've had the opportunity to meet. So Dr. Villa, to close, I'm going to pose probably the most important question that you will be faced with during your whole interview process. And that is red or green?
Red or green?
Red or green?
Red. Red.
So that's somewhat of a trick. That happens to be the New Mexico official state question, red or green. And it's in reference to the chili.
Still red.
Still red.
Red.
Logo red.
Red.
Red all around.
Red.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon, Dr. Villa. We appreciate your participation and your candid responses. And we look forward to seeing you shortly for the public session as well.
Okay, thank you. And I want to thank you for your participation, and please feel free to come into the next session. I would appreciate your participation if you have the time. And thank you all for being here this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And before we close, I do want to acknowledge and thank Chancellor James Malm from the Gallup branch, who has also been serving as the chair for this advisory search committee and host and handler for our candidates throughout these last several weeks. So thank you. It's been a pleasure having you in Taos, and appreciate all the work that you've committed to this process. Thank you all, and we'll see you shortly. Bye-bye.
Thank you.